I'm Clara, 31 years old. I never imagined that an old photo album on Christmas night would mark the beginning of my journey to reclaim my real name. It was supposed to be a warm, festive evening. I brought Daniel, my fiancé, to officially meet my family. The tree was perfectly decorated. My mom beamed as she opened the photo album, like she did every year. I smiled along, just like I always had. Until Daniel frowned. He flipped through the pages. Every photo was me. Same smile, same expression, only the backgrounds changed. I still remember him leaning over and whispering, "Don't you see it? Every photo looks the same. Like someone staged it." Before I tell you what had been buried for the past 25 years, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever felt like your childhood didn't fully belong to you. The story begins on that fateful Christmas night. Just like every year, the warm, festive atmosphere I'd been waiting for had arrived. New York was freezing outside the window, but inside my mother's house, everything was arranged down to the last detail: a 12-foot Christmas tree glowing with golden lights, the fireplace crackling steadily, the dining table covered with vintage lace, and bowls of pumpkin soup lined up as if it were a photo shoot for a holiday ad. It was nearly perfect. I led Daniel by the hand into the room. He smiled politely at my mom, bowed slightly, while I took a deep breath, like I was stepping into a role I knew by heart. My mom gave me a radiant smile, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "Tonight is special. Make sure you smile, sweetheart." Dinner unfolded exactly like it always did, my mom telling stories of how I used to eat and sleep, how smart I was, then the part where I almost got lost in a supermarket at age 3. Daniel listened politely. I smiled on cue. Nodded when I was supposed to. Then, just like every year, she stepped away from the table and walked straight to the old wooden cabinet in the corner. She pulled out something familiar, an old brown leather album with a tarnished brass clasp, the one I thought I had memorized page by page. She sat down and gently opened the first page. There I was, in a pink coat, standing in a winter park. Next page, still me, same smile, holding a red ball, this time against a blue ocean backdrop. I tilted my head. Something felt repetitive. Daniel had stopped smiling. He sat up straighter, eyes fixed on each photo. His fingers flipped quickly through the pages, as if searching for errors in a forged contract. "You don't see it?" He leaned in and whispered, "Every shot is identical. Like someone copied them, just changed the background." I blinked. I had looked at these photos my whole life. I used to think they were memories. But now, each smile, identical, frozen, emotionless, suddenly felt like they were mocking me. I froze when Daniel pointed to one page. "This is Photoshop. Same lighting, same angle, same expression. Only the background is different." My mom kept flipping the album, laughing, unaware that our eyes had begun to change. I swallowed hard. In that moment, I could hear the soft ticking of the radiator, and my heartbeat slowing down. On the drive home, Daniel pulled out his phone and quietly showed me the photos he had just taken. He didn't say a word. I just looked. And felt like someone was slowly pulling back the curtain on a memory that had long been too still, too quiet. I reached into my bag and took out the USB my mom once gave me. She called it "Your Childhood Memories." It was filled with nameless JPEG files. No dates. No context. That night, I sat in the middle of the hotel living room, the desk lamp casting a warm glow. My laptop was open in front of me, and the pile of old documents my mother had once given me lay scattered around like shattered fragments of a blurred memory. The first photo showed me in a preschool uniform, shoulder-length hair, holding a crayon next to a whiteboard. In the bottom right corner, it read, Class of 2003. I counted backward. I was 6. And strangely, there wasn't a single photo older than that. No baby pictures. No first birthday photos. No snapshots of my first steps, no birth certificate, no letters celebrating my arrival. Just a collection of eerily similar photos, all beginning at one specific point, when I turned 6. I called my mother. She didn't seem worried. Her voice, as always, was soft and careful. The war made you forget. The doctor said it was trauma from when you were little. I asked again, slower this time, but why, isn't there a single trace of me before 1997? Silence. One long breath on the other end. Don't dig into the past, Clara. Some things are better left alone. They'll only bring you pain. I hung up. And for the first time, I didn't believe her. Daniel sat next to me, quiet. Then he said, "Let me try looking up your records." A few hours later, he turned the laptop screen toward me. A government data page appeared. Name, Clara Moore. Date of birth, 1991. The first record in the file, preschool enrollment in 1997. Nothing before that. No registered social security number at birth. No hospital records. Completely blank. I stared at the screen, at the red, chilling words that felt like a verdict. No records found prior to 1997. I tried to stay calm. But something cold had begun creeping through every crack in my consciousness. How does a person simply appear at age 6? I leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The question slipped out, soft, but sharp as a blade. If I didn't forget, maybe I was never remembered. Daniel reached over and held my hand. Maybe you weren't born, here. I sat in the bathtub, warm water rising to my neck, my head resting against the cold porcelain edge. Bubbles floated lazily across the surface, the soft yellow light above casting a hazy glow, like I was drifting in a place that didn't quite exist. Daniel had gone to bed early. I told him I needed a little quiet. But the truth was, I was afraid to close my eyes. Afraid of the empty spaces in my head, the pieces that had been erased, or maybe never existed at all. I closed my eyes, just for a few seconds. And then, something surfaced. Not clearly. Just a soft, gentle melody, humming quietly, stretching out. Not in English. Not in any language I'd ever learned. That voice felt so close, as if someone was sitting right beside me, gently rubbing my back, singing a lullaby in a language only the two of us could understand. I opened my eyes. The water had gone cold without me noticing. I sat up, wiped the mirror, the heavy fog slid away, revealing my face staring back. But it didn't feel like me. The eyes in the mirror stared back, not familiar, not strange. Just empty. As if even this body wasn't sure who it belonged to. I wrapped myself in a towel and stepped out. In my mind, the lullaby continued, no clear words, but every note tugged at something deep inside me. I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar. Lullaby Balkan 1990s. Refugee song for children. Eastern Europe lullaby woman voice. The results were old, distorted recordings, mostly in Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian. I didn't understand the lyrics. But my chest ached each time a melody played. The third video started with a woman singing softly to a child in a refugee camp. I burst into tears from the very first note. I didn't know why. All I knew was that I couldn't stop crying. Maybe I had heard that song before. Maybe I had been that child. I wiped my tears and typed another phrase. Missing children Balkan 1997. And then, for the first time, I saw tiny faces, wide-open eyes, names listed below. None of them had my name. But I couldn't stop looking. Because something inside me whispered, keep going. This is where the road begins. And I found an article from 1997 about a little girl evacuated on a relief plane. The face in the photo was mine. Just then Daniel woke up. Daniel sat behind me, arms folded, eyes glued to the screen. And me, I didn't dare move the mouse. Just let my fingertip rest on the trackpad, like touching a wound before the bandage is peeled. Blurry photo. Old newspaper. Short headline in Times font, Balkan evacuation, May 1997. The black and white image was grainy in the corners. A group of children being lifted onto a cargo plane, the girl on the far left looked straight into the lens. Eyes wide open. Lips pressed together. The light hitting her cheek made the right side brighter, the left side sinking into shadow. I tilted my head to match the girl's angle in the photo. Daniel leaned in and whispered, "You always tilt your head like that when you're nervous." I raised my hand to cover my mouth. Not out of fear, but because my jaw had locked, as if it needed to hold back something, even though I didn't yet know what. I zoomed in. On the girl's left ear, a tiny mark. I reached up to touch my own. Right there. A small birthmark, the size of a grain of rice. My mother once said it was a mosquito bite from when I was a baby. Daniel said nothing. He just placed the old photo next to the one from my first grade yearbook, then took out a ruler to measure the distance between the eyes, nose, mouth. Every point matched, like a fingerprint. I stared at the two photos, one black and white, one in the bright red of a school uniform, and felt like I was staring at two parallel worlds sewn together by invisible thread. I don't remember how many copies I printed. My fingers were stained with ink. The printer was hot to the touch. Sheets of paper scattered across the hotel room floor. But I kept going. Relief reports, evacuation lists, guardian applications, humanitarian files. I downloaded, highlighted, printed them all, as if turning them into something physical I could touch would make my suspicions feel more real. One name kept repeating, Vera M. The person who signed for the evacuee children, under a humanitarian asylum request dated May 1997. The full name was redacted, but the dates, the intake location, matched. I paused at a faded line in smudged ink. Child has no personal documents, provisional name issued for tracking. I picked up my phone. Not shaking. Just cold. My thumb moved like a machine. I tapped call. The screen showed, Mom. She answered after 2 rings. I didn't wait for her to greet me. I said straight out, "Did you ever visit a refugee camp in the Balkans in 1997? Silence. I could hear the sound of a knife tapping a cutting board. Then her voice, soft as wind behind a curtain. "You shouldn't dig into this, Clara. Some things are meant to be forgotten." I didn't scream. Didn't cry. Just lifted the thick folder, every sheet stamped confidential, trembling slightly in my hands like knocks on the door of the past. I laid out 4 photos side by side. The girl from 1997. Me at age 6. My first passport photo. And my current face, the one frozen in realization. Daniel looked at them all for a long moment, then said softly, "You weren't adopted." I turned to him. He added, "They moved you. Like a piece of humanitarian cargo." I gathered all the documents into a brown envelope and sealed it shut. And for the first time, I brought Daniel to my parents' house, not to visit, but to reclaim my past. The wooden door creaked open slowly, making a faint grinding sound like teeth clenching on a cold night. Vera peeked out, her hair a mess, eyes glazed over from being woken in the middle of the night. The street lamp cast just enough light for me to see the man standing behind her. Him, the one I used to call Dad, still wearing striped pajamas, hands in his pockets, silent like a shadow glued to her back for all those years. I didn't greet them. I just raised the thick file, plastic cover glinting, pages inside holding truths that couldn't be denied. We need to talk. Vera raised an eyebrow but stepped aside to let me in. Everything looked exactly as it had the last time I visited, the fake flower vase on the table, the oversized wedding portrait in the living room, the faint scent of jasmine oil lingering in the air like a fresh coat of paint trying to mask cracks in the wall. I placed the file on the dining table. No preamble. I flipped through the pages. A photo of the child in 1997. The UN Relief Report. A humanitarian asylum application signed V. Moore. The last page, a signature comparison chart, 2 lines of handwriting eerily identical. Vera stared at the documents, lips pressed so tightly they turned white. For a few seconds, I saw a flicker of panic flash through her eyes. But it quickly vanished, replaced by that familiar smirk. Oh, Clara, she leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. You're making this up because you're not the favorite anymore, huh? I didn't answer. I pulled out the photo from the article and placed it squarely in front of her. Far left corner, the child looking up, eyes wide. I pointed. You call this family? Vera shot up, slamming her palm on the table. The force made the family portrait on the wall tremble, then crash to the ground. The glass shattered. The photo slid out, face down on the floor. No one picked it up. No one bent down. The air thickened. I could feel the shamelessness in her silence, the resigned compliance in my adoptive father, and a deep bitterness swelling in my chest. I stood tall, looking her in the eye one last time. I don't owe you gratitude. My voice was soft as wind, but each word cut like glass. I owe myself the truth. I turned and walked out. Before leaving, I left the file open to the last page, where a woman's name was faintly printed in smudged black ink, Mara Petrovic. The one who signed for the undocumented child during evacuation, 1997. I left without looking back. Holding on to just one thing, the name Mara Petrovic. And a clear, chilling instinct, if I wanted the truth, I had to leave America. I returned home in utter despair and anguish, knowing that the parents I had loved with all my heart had deceived me for all those years. Yet, undeterred, I made up my mind to uncover the truth, and we began with the list of people who went missing that year. Daniel placed the laptop on the table, pushing it toward me, the screen already open to Google search. I didn't type right away. My hand was still clutching the slip of paper with the name, Mara Petrovic, 3 words that looked oddly simple, yet weighed as much as a whole life never properly named. I touched the keyboard, my fingertips ice cold. Mara Petrovic. Balkan. 1997. I hit enter. The first result was a list from a non-governmental organization. The bold headline read, List of missing refugees, Balkan region, 1992 to 1999. Daniel leaned in to read with me. I scrolled down, each line was a name, a birth year, a short note. Mara Petrovic, born 1965, lost contact after evacuation from Sarajevo in May 1997. I read that line over and over. May 1997. The same time frame in the documents I had found. The same as the photo of the child being lifted onto the plane. Daniel looked at me. Maybe that's your mother. I nodded slightly, but my eyes never left the screen. Inside me, something stirred, not fear, but an old hunger, like an appetite I had long trained myself to ignore. I opened a new tab and typed, Refugee Family Forums Balkan Missing 1990s. I found an old forum, gray blue background, tiny Times New Roman font, where survivors or their relatives posted messages searching, sometimes just a photo, a question, a name. I created an account. Profile photo, my 6-year-old face, pink jacket. I wrote, seeking information about a child possibly evacuated from Bosnia in May 1997. The child had a small birthmark behind the left ear. I attached photos, both black and white and color versions. Daniel sat beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. I didn't turn to him. I was waiting. Not just for messages. I was waiting for something to reach into me, like a thread being pulled back from where I had once been cut loose. 3 hours later, a small notification popped up in the corner of the screen. You have one new message. I clicked. Just a few lines, from a user named B.P.63. Does this girl have a small scar behind her left ear? Like a little crescent moon? I froze. Daniel looked at me. What is it? I didn't answer. I raised my hand to my left ear, swept my hair aside. A tiny scar, no bigger than a pinky tip, curved like a crescent. I stood up abruptly and ran to the bathroom. Switched on the light. Stared straight into the mirror. Tilted my head, tracing the scar, the one my mother used to say was a mosquito bite from when I was a baby. I touched it for a long time. The scar said nothing. But I could hear my heartbeat and a voice from a distant memory echoing somewhere inside, Mala Luna. The lullaby voice in the bathtub. The voice of a woman who had once held me against her chest and called me by that name. I returned. Daniel already had the camera ready. Daniel set the laptop on his lap, adjusting the room's lighting to a softer tone. I sat across from him, leaning back into the chair, clutching the edge of my sweater like I was trying to hold onto something that might slip away. Zoom connection read, waiting for other participant to join. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, even though I wasn't wearing headphones. The internet was unstable. The screen flickered a couple of times before lighting up. The camera was tilted, the frame shaking slightly. An elderly woman appeared. She was sitting in a small room, dimly lit, the wall behind her a faded beige. The image wasn't clear yet, but I could tell she was trembling. We looked at each other. Said nothing. No hi. No, I think it's you. Just 2 sets of eyes, connected across 3 decades and half the globe. I saw a small photo next to her cup of hot tea. The photo was of me, 6 years old, wearing a pale pink jacket. The same photo I'd posted on the forum. One of her hands slowly reached up to the screen, as if trying to touch me. Her fingers thin, knuckles swollen with age. She brought her other hand to her mouth. Not to stifle a cry, but as if trying to hold back something not quite ready to be released. I pressed my lips together, throat tightening, struggling to keep my voice steady. Are you Mara? She nodded. A few more seconds of silence, but this time it wasn't shock. It was recognition. Then she spoke. I never stopped looking for you. Her voice was raspy, breaking in places, as though she had to borrow from the past just to speak. They told me you were gone. I couldn't hold it in. Tears spilled down, as if they'd just been waiting for permission. I sobbed. Bowed my head into my hands. It didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like I was being born for the first time from a single, honest sentence. She spoke slowly. About Sarajevo, spring 1997. The bombs. The Western soldier who spoke a language she didn't understand, carrying me away in the middle of the night, saying for safety. About the years she spent searching through records, refugee camps, adoption registries. About the one photo she kept, the only one, as if clinging to a severed limb. I don't remember every word she said. I just remember her hand never left the screen. And those eyes, like every blink was an apology that never made it into words. I whispered, "Do you hate me? For being gone?" She shook her head. "I'm not angry with you. I just regret not holding on to you until the very end." Daniel handed me a tissue. I didn't take it. I didn't want to wipe away any part of this moment. Not even the tears. A low battery warning flashed on the Zoom screen. I didn't even think about plugging it in. She told me I had been named Luna, the name she gave me because I was born under the full moon when the refugee camp lit up in silver light. "Mala Luna," she said. "Little moon." I looked at her carefully. Gray hair. Frail shoulders. But those eyes, they were the same ones I'd seen in the mirror so many times, even if I couldn't name them. She was me. I was her. A mother and daughter once torn apart by war, now rediscovering each other through pixelated screens and choppy audio. I asked, if they hadn't taken me, what would have happened to me? She smiled. But it was a sad smile. "Maybe you wouldn't have been safe. But you would have known who you were." I nodded. I wanted to say something profound, something grand. But all I said was, "I'm here." And she replied, "I know." The screen faded. Zoom shut down. My laptop had run out of battery. Daniel asked, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I looked down at my hands, still shaking slightly after those minutes filled with so much silence. But inside me, something had just begun to glow. I placed my hand over my chest, where my heart still beat. For the first time in years, I truly felt alive. And I booked a flight to the Balkans, for the very first time returning to the place I was taken from. The plane landed at a small airport on the outskirts of Sarajevo at 6:42 a.m., before daylight had fully arrived. The sky was murky gray, snow blanketing rooftops and the runway. There was no noise. No ads. No blinking electronic signs. Everything was eerily quiet, as if this place itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me to return. Daniel didn't come with me. He said, "You should go alone, so you can hear the voice of that place more clearly." I knew he was right. I stepped out through a narrow door, not the usual kind with automatic glass sliding, but a wooden door with a worn metal handle. The smell of snow, wood smoke, and a hint of old diesel mixed together, making me feel like I just stepped through a different layer of air, back to a time that didn't belong to the present. She stood there. In the snow. Holding a bouquet of dried flowers. No mask. No heavy coat. Just the same unwavering eyes, the ones I'd seen in the mirror all those years, never knowing why I always felt something was missing. I didn't run to her. She didn't move either. We just looked at each other, two women standing a few steps apart, in a world of white, with no one witnessing that moment except the cold sky and the earth beneath us. I walked forward. She opened her arms. The first hug lasted 3 full minutes. No words were spoken. Just breath on hair, heartbeats pressed through fabric. Her hands, dry, thin, wrapped around my head as if afraid I might vanish into thin air. The bouquet dropped into the snow. No one picked it up. She drove me to the old village in a small rented truck. Muddy roads, bare trees on both sides. Snow still fell sparsely, each flake landing on the windshield and melting like it was never there. We barely spoke the whole way. She would occasionally glance at me, as if checking whether I was really there, or just a dream she still didn't dare believe. The village appeared after a bend, only a few jagged rooftops remained, many houses had collapsed, some blackened by fire. No children. No barking dogs. Just snow. Her house was a skeletal wooden frame, half the roof caved in, one wall leaning like an old person with a tired back. But the back wall still stood, with faint chalk drawings still visible. I stepped out of the truck. Cold wind slapped my face. She went ahead, carefully stepping over the remaining stones. I watched her shoes sink into the snow, each footprint small, light, but determined. I followed. Slowly. Not because I was afraid of slipping, but because every step felt like walking through the soil where my childhood had been buried. On the stained wall were chalk lines nearly faded, a house, a sun, and a child's handprint. That hand. 5 chubby fingers, overlapping a larger hand. I raised mine. A perfect fit. I pressed my palm against the old drawing, the wall freezing cold, but underneath it, I could feel warmth. Not physical heat, but something like a nameless memory awakening. I drew your hand here, she said behind me. The morning they came. I was afraid you'd forget. I turned around. She didn't cry, but her hands gripped her shawl so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I stepped closer, took her hand in mine. I don't remember anything about this place, but this place remembers me. She nodded. Her first smile since I arrived appeared, not bright, not dazzling. Just a warm flicker, enough to let me know I had been right to come back. We sat on the cracked cement floor, eating bread with honey and sipping herbal tea she'd brewed from spring water nearby. No one asked what would happen next. No one mapped out the future. We just sat, like two beings that had once been torn apart, now trying to fuse back together, not with words, but with presence. I took out my phone. Opened a file. U.S. citizenship form. Section, legal name change. I didn't hesitate. Didn't ask for permission. I typed, Clara Mara Petrovic. The next day, I walked to a small cemetery behind the village, where she once buried a rag doll, and hope. The embassy building sat tucked away on a small, damp, quiet street. There were no flags waving, no long lines like in the movies. Just a silver metal sign, and a security guard checking IDs at a black iron gate. My mother and I arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a dark wool coat, a hood pulled over her head. I held a folder in my hands, everything inside, the identity verification papers, a photo from 1997, letters from the International Relief Agency, and an independent DNA match report. We sat waiting in a small room, old fabric chairs, walls painted cream. A consular officer stepped in, male, early 50s, white shirt slightly wrinkled, thin-rimmed glasses. He took the file, sat across from us. Are you Clara Moore? I nodded. But a second later, I spoke slowly, Clara Mara Petrovic. He looked at me more closely. Then opened the folder, flipped through the pages, stopping at the black and white photo from 1997, a 5-year-old girl, cropped hair, being carried by a Western soldier, eyes wide open staring into the lens. He looked back at me. His eyes froze. A silence passed between us. I didn't know what he was thinking. But I saw it, that moment when the pieces clicked into place. Not the look of someone following protocol, but someone who realized something had been wrong, for far too long. He nodded slightly, then turned to my mother. You confirm Clara is your biological daughter? My mother didn't hesitate. She spoke with a firm voice, not loud, but echoing through that small room. I used to say my daughter's name in my sleep every single night. Now I just need to say it once, and that's enough. I bit my lip. Tears welled up. But I didn't wipe them away. I wanted to feel them every drop, as if parts of me were waking up again. The officer nodded, signed his name. He handed me the pen. We'll issue a new birth certificate with your chosen name. If you're ready. I said nothing. Just picked up the pen. First line, first name, Clara. Middle name, Mara. Last name, Petrovic. I wrote it in steady handwriting. No shaking. No looking back. When we stepped out of the embassy, snow was still falling lightly. The road was wet, not icy, but enough to reflect the soft light of a gray sky. I didn't call a cab right away. I stood there, in the heart of Sarajevo, and unfolded the document I had just received. A thin piece of paper, my name printed in blue ink, with an official signature curled neatly at the bottom. I rolled it up, tied it with a thin ribbon, and tucked it into my coat pocket. It didn't feel like a government document. It felt like a letter. Sent back to me after 25 years. My mother stood beside me, silent. She just placed her hand on my shoulder. Warm. And right. I turned to her and said softly, I don't need a reason to exist. I just need to be myself. That evening, we returned to the village. A small fire glowed inside the rented house. Mom made bean soup and toasted bread. On the table, I placed 2 mugs, one for her, one for me, and opened my laptop. Daniel called, video popping up. He saw my face and smiled as soon as he caught my expression. All done? I nodded. Held the paper up to the camera. Daniel read it slowly. Clara Mara Petrovic. Sounds right. I smiled. Then turned the laptop toward my mother. Daniel waved. My mom smiled, shy, and greeted him in her broken English. Hello. Thank you for finding my daughter. I laughed. Daniel laughed. And I thought I'd never lived a single moment fully as myself until today. I flew back to the US, and this time I wrote my birth mother's name on the wedding invitation. Guest of honor. The soft scent of lavender drifted in the air. A piano played gently from the garden corner, where white veils danced lightly in the breeze. On the small lawn, chairs were neatly arranged, draped in silk. Each guest's name was handwritten in black ink. I stood behind the white wooden door, holding my wedding bouquet, not the pastel pink I once imagined I'd choose, but white with hints of olive green, the color of new beginnings. Daniel waited at the end of the aisle. His gaze was tender, yet full of emotion. My cheeks flushed, not from nerves, but because in this moment, I felt complete. Mom, Mara, sat in the front row. She clutched a handkerchief, the same one I saw her use to wipe her tears the day I reclaimed my birth certificate. Her eyes were red. But the look she gave me held no guilt, no sorrow. Only pride. And 2 seats were left empty on the other side. I used to think I would invite them. My adoptive parents. There was a time I called them family. A time I begged for their recognition. But today, I understand. Some relationships can't be saved, shouldn't be clung to, and don't deserve to stand between you and the truth. I walked. No hesitation. No guilt. No looking back. I had lived too long with a name that wasn't mine. Today, I began living under the name I chose for myself. Not out of revenge, but because I'm worth it. Each step down the flower-lined aisle was like shedding a layer of old skin. Clara Moore, the girl who tried to please everyone, who felt guilty for living her own life, was now just a past chapter. I didn't need to prove I was right. I just needed to stop lying to myself. When I reached Daniel and took his hand, we didn't exchange rings right away. We both looked toward the wedding board that read, "Clara and Daniel, a celebration of truth and love." Not wedding. Not union. But celebration of the journey to becoming yourself. My mother gave a speech after the ceremony. She stepped up to the podium, still holding her handkerchief. She didn't speak in English. She spoke in her native tongue, the language I'd only just begun to learn again. But I understood. Not word for word, but through every expression. Every pause. Every time she placed her hand over her heart, calling my name. Mara. Clara. My daughter. No one in the room understood. But everyone cried. As the evening wound down, I stood beneath the warm lights, watching people dance. A friend came up and asked, "Don't you feel sad your adoptive parents didn't come?" I smiled, then looked at the two empty chairs. I don't live to please anymore. I live to be at peace. I placed my hand on my stomach. Not because I was pregnant, but because beneath that thin fabric, something was growing. A new life, sown by me. When the party ended, I went to my room, changed out of my dress, washed off my makeup. I picked up a handwritten letter and placed it on the table. Sender, me. Recipient, also me. But not the girl who once felt she had to be grateful just to be loved. The woman who now knows. Love shouldn't come with conditions. I stepped onto the balcony. The first snow of the season had begun to fall. I tilted my face up and let each flake kiss my skin. Dear friend, if this story touched you, leave a comment. You might just help someone gather the courage to find themselves again. I used to think forgiveness was the only way to heal. Now I know forgiveness doesn't always need words. It only takes the courage to walk away, in silence. If you believe your true identity is your right to live authentically, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone like me might just need a story to begin again.